Congress refused to seat Southerners elected to the House and Senate, many of whom had been leaders of the Confederacy. It passed a bill granting citizenship rights to African Americans, a law that President Johnson said was unconstitutional. He vetoed the bill, but Congress overrode his veto. Congress also passed the 14th Amendment, which sought to give African Americans equal rights to other American citizens. African Americans began playing an active role in politics and won election to many public offices. The radical Republicans began to win more and more support. In 1868, war hero Ulysses S. Grant won the presidential election for the Republicans. Strengthened by the votes of African Americans, many Republicans won election in the South. Angry at being shut out of power, some Southern whites resorted to violence and created societies to terrorize blacks. The most notorious of these societies was the Ku Klux Klan, whose members wore hoods over their heads. They attacked and killed African Americans in the South and whites who supported the freed men. By the mid-1870s, though, Northern interest in Reconstruction had weakened. By 1874, Republicans lost control of most state governments in the South. The new governments were dominated by whites, and they passed new laws that took away African Americans' rights. In 1876, Reconstruction came to an end. Segregation took hold in the South. State governments passed laws that created separate schools, hospitals, theaters, and restaurants for whites and blacks. Many African Americans and poor whites in rural areas were forced to become sharecroppers. A sharecropper is a farmer who rents land and pays rent with a share of his crops. This new rule pushed people into debt and poverty. By the 1880s, the South's economy began to recover and new industries appeared. Agricultural output began to grow. Cotton production, which had lagged during the war, boomed again. Planters put more land into tobacco production, and output grew. By 1900, a new South was emerging, and an industrial age was underway. But the promise of equal rights for African Americans in the South was a distant memory. Did you know? Reconstruction established a commitment to a society based on equality under the law. A century later, during the Civil Rights Movement, Americans, both black and white, would build on that commitment as they faced another struggle for racial equality.
Despite the changes that followed Reconstruction, the South remained segregated. African American and white children attended separate schools and generally received an inferior education. Eventually, enough people wanted change, and they began the struggle for integration.
Have you ever had to fight for something you believed in?
My parents thought I should stop dancing because it came in conflict with my academics, and I had to convince them over time that I did love dance so much, and now I'm still dancing.
There was a list that went around the school, and people were writing things on the list that they disliked about my friend, and I stuck by my friend.
I'm fighting against the dress code saying that you have to have your shirt tucked in.
I had an argument with my mom a few weeks ago. I wanted my curfew to be moved from midnight to 1, and I told her that she should trust me enough to know that I won't do anything that I'm not supposed to, and trust me enough to know that I pick good friends, and she finally moved it to 1:30.
I really wanted to make the varsity tennis team this year, so I went to all these camps over the summer, and I played 4 hours every day during the week, and I still didn't make it.
50 years ago, Prince Edward County, Virginia, and Clarendon County, South Carolina were 2 of 5 communities that brought their demands for equal education and equal treatment under the law to the U.S. Supreme Court.